So I wanted to talk to you really briefly about formative assessments and checks for understanding. And the two really do go hand in hand. Checks for understanding by nature are formative assessments. Now, I don't want anybody to be confused with formative assessments versus summative assessments. And I don't think usually people are going to be confused because the words kind of give you their meaning. Summative assessments are essentially a summary of learning. It's the end of a unit test that you might give or a paper that you might assign that shows that students understand a specific concept. And teachers do this all the time. Parents know they're coming, students know they're coming, teachers know they're coming. Everybody knows that teachers are going to give an end of the unit or an end of the chapter test. That's a summative test. Even some types of quizzes at the end of a unit or at the end of a section in a textbook, those are summative assessments. Now, in contrast, formative assessments are tinier, less weighted, usually not even graded assessments in order for us to check students' understanding. So, for example, I teach history. Obviously, at the end of a unit, let's say we're covering chapter 18, we're covering Andrew Jackson's democracy in America or the Civil War or anything like that. I'm going to give them a handful of quizzes in that Civil War unit and also an end of the unit test, or maybe split it up into two tests. But that's supposed to tell me whether or not they learned the material or didn't learn the material. And it tells their parents that as well. And that's what students are graded on. But in the meantime, I should constantly be checking to make sure that they understand what we're talking about in regards to the Civil War or Andrew Jackson's democracy or insert topic here. And I can do that by every single lesson that I teach. I need to make sure that I'm asking them intelligent questions and seeing if they're trekking with me. It could be as simple as a common strategy of thumbs up if you're understanding, thumbs down if you're not, or thumbs in the middle if you kind of get it but you might have a couple questions. Now, doing this allows me to see right away in real time my students are understanding what I'm saying, or my students aren't, or it's kind of mixed and I have to go back and reteach some things, or I need to focus on individual students to make sure that they're understanding what I'm saying and I could allow other students to move on with the material. Either way, it's really a way of forming their learning, formative. It's really a way of informing me on how I'm doing as a teacher and also informing the students on how they're performing as well. It's kind of like an indicator. It tells them whether or not they're going to be ready for the summative assessment. Because if a student is constantly doing poorly on checks for understanding and it's clear that they don't understand, or it's clear that they're not really ready to take a test, then I need to go back and I need to reteach them. I need to go back and make sure that they understand exactly what's expected of them and exactly what they need to know. So that's formative assessments and checks for understanding. And there's multiple strategies out there on how to do it. It could be as simple as, like I said, thumbs up, thumbs down. It could be writing in a journal. It can be using technology to answer questions in the form of a Kahoot or a Quizzes or a Socrative or any other type of program you can use. Plickers is a good program where you ask a question in class and you scan with your phone their answers, and they have barcodes that they have up. Those are excellent tools that allow you to formatively assess and check students' understanding. Ultimately, I've heard it said that a teacher should really know how each student's going to perform on a summative assessment before they even take a summative assessment. And when I first heard that, I really took it to heart because I started being more intentional with inputting at least 4 or 5 checks for understanding throughout a lesson. And there's been times where I've literally paused my lesson and gone back over some of the other concepts that I've been discussing because I knew students weren't understanding it. And in order for me to be fair to them and not throw them under the bus by just giving them a summative assessment, a test, or a quiz, I need to make sure that they're prepped for it. I need to make sure that they're truly ready for it. It's just like when these students go out and try to get a driver's license. The road test is their summative assessment. But in order to check for their understanding, they have a driver instructor that's with them for a handful of hours, teaching them and seeing what they know and don't know, and their parents are helping them as well. And I'm sure that parents wouldn't send their kids off to do a road test if the kid cannot drive the car at all. So they certainly formatively assess their student as they go along, just as we have to do in the classroom. So it's super important. Now, the last thing that I want to say is that every teacher should be utilizing technology in order to download the data for checks for understanding. As much as teachers love to do the in-class thumbs up, thumbs down, any questions, any concerns, who's struggling, who's not, students aren't always going to give you the right answer. Students might look around and see that everybody has their thumb up, so of course, Johnny in the back is going to put his thumb up because that's what all of his friends are doing, and he doesn't want to seem stupid. Now, additionally, even if you get good data from it and everybody's telling the truth, Johnny's putting thumbs down because he doesn't understand, and Sally's putting thumbs up because she does, and Michelle's doing the thumb in the middle because she kind of understands but doesn't, even if they're being truthful, I highly doubt, and I know this because that's my own experience when I tried it, I highly doubt that you're remembering what each student said and did. So then how does that really help? The only real way it'll help is if the majority of students put their thumbs down or thumbs up, and you know you can move on or you got to reteach. But that doesn't help you single out specific students to give them extra help or to give them feedback. There's really no feedback there at all. So that's why I strongly recommend using programs like Nearpod or Formative or Pear Deck. These are websites that allow you to actually download the data. Even something like Plickers, like I mentioned. You could ask the same questions. You could ask for thumbs up, thumbs down, but instead of them giving it with their actual thumb, they drag something on their phone or on their computer to a certain side of the screen, which then you see in real time, but you can also save that data. You know exactly that Michelle on May 12th put a thumbs up when covering this material. You know exactly what questions Michael struggled with on a Quizzes or a Kahoot because you have the data. And you could analyze that data and really predict, is the student going to do well on a summative assessment or do poorly? And hopefully we catch them early so that we can reteach the material and give them the support that they need. Plus, it shows parents and your bosses, the administration, that you're truly being diligent in knowing if your students are learning or not. Because believe it or not, summative assessments are not always going to be the most concrete way to tell whether or not a student fully learned in the unit or didn't. Maybe they're a poor test taker. But how are you going to know that unless you have formative assessments along the way? Because maybe Sally's getting all the formative assessments correct and she's really doing awesome in the class. But when it comes down to every summative assessment, she does extremely poor. So that's data that we can look at, which then informs our teacher, forms our teaching actually. And it really does help us. It helps the students, it helps the parents, it helps the school. So make sure you're checking for understanding. Go ahead and Google checks for understanding strategies, and you'll find many websites that give a list of 50 checks for understanding, 60, 70, hundreds. They're all over the place. So make sure you go online, check it out. It's really going to help your teaching. Make sure you include a handful of them every single day, and you'll have a lot of data and truly know how your students are going to do before you even give them a test.